We haven't done too many preaching from the OT, sometimes said as Original Testament or the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, but we're going to look at that today because it's a fascinating little passage. It's coming out of the book of Haggai, which is not a very large one. It will probably take you longer to find it than to read it. It's a tiny, tiny little prophet passage in there, and it's all written in a very, very specific point of time in their story, kind of an inflection point in their story. And knowing when it was written will help you unpack the importance of how this starts to document a change in theology that will make room for Jesus to come and to expand the faith out to all people. And we're going to start seeing those sort of shifts happen here in this tiny little prophet book in Haggai. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit today. But to make sense of it then, we need to be in the context of the moment. So we're going to do just a little history review of where we're at and what's going on. So Israel and Judah, sometimes two nations, sometimes one, are little buffer state or states smashed along the Mediterranean there between Egypt to the south and kind of a rotating cast of characters to the north. Now, early on in Israel's history, they won some battles. They were able to accomplish some things, but by the time past the judges and the superpower states started rising, they start to become the small fish in the pond. Fascinatingly enough, most faiths struggle with that. Most of the other faiths in the ancient Near East require victory in battle to justify that they are right and that their faith is right. And so if you were to lose battles, as they will start doing more and more, where is your God? Where is your faith? They would ask. What is going on? How does your faith address things when they don't work out? And this raises up the job of the prophet. So, and we're going to talk about the prophet role in a little bit. So by this point, Egypt is still the superpower to the south. Up above them now, the Babylonians are the current superpower. There's also been the Assyrians, the Persians will be the superpower shortly, and by the time Jesus comes along, it's the Romans that are at the north. But that relationship of that pressure from the north and the south maintains the same, because if you want to make inroads into Africa and you have grand designs of conquest and you're any one of those northern kingdoms, you got to come down through Egypt, but to get to Egypt, you have to come through this tiny little nation state, Israel, Judah, sometimes one, sometimes two, and conquer them on your way. And so they've got this pressure. And so the only way they can really survive that is by playing favorites and hoping they pick right between the Egypt's fighting whoever it is that's coming down. And they hope that if they pick right, they will be given favor by that kingdom and will be allowed to continue to rule themselves to some degree. Okay, so that doesn't always work out. So that then gives the prophets that really challenging problem. If God made a covenant with the people for protection, and we lost the battle, how does that happen? Was God's word not good? Was the covenant not good? Was God not strong enough? Or, and this is where the prophets often go, covenants are two-sided relationships. Did we break the covenant? And thus the protection causes void. Is that what happens? And so you'll see a lot of the prophets kind of really making that case, that argument, that look at, this is what we were called to do, to walk humbly, seek justice, those sort of things. And this is what we are doing, which is not those things. Therefore, we broke a covenant. And the protection is lifted, and we're thrown to the travails of the world and whatever might happen around us. And now we're just the small fish in a big pond. Right? So the prophet's job is often that, to justify and make sense of how these things can happen, and kind of a calling back of saying, so let's get right with God, because if we do, we can be protected, and we're feeling very unprotected, very vulnerable in these times. So let's make sure that we do that. Well, at the time of just before Haggai, the Babylonian Empire was the big fish, and they had plans to come down into Egypt, and so the battle was going to commence, and they had to pick sides. And some people in Israel/Judah chose to partner with Egypt, and some people chose to partner with the Babylonians. The battle happened, and the Babylonians won. But because some people chose to go with them and were like, okay, we'll just be your docile kingdom, they weren't too harsh on them at that point. And the Babylonians go back and do their thing. But they make demands. You got to pay this, you got to do this, you got to do this. And the demand starts becoming such a burden that even those who said, I choose the Babylonians, are going like, maybe we really shouldn't have, because they're asking a lot of us. So they start to rebel, and they decide, no, we're changing our mind, we're going to go with Egypt, and it sets the stage for a second conflict. So King Nebuchadnezzar comes back down from Babylonia, and they're going to fight the Egyptians plus the Israelites again. And this time they're kind of throwing in their weight with the powerhouse to the south, and they get defeated a second time. And now Babylon is mad. And so they destroy the temple, and they take the leaders and the people, and they take them into exile. And this is a major shift in what we do with that faith tradition now. So because it requires, so that the problem I set up before, like if you're the prophet, how do you say this bad thing happened? How do you make sense of that? Imagine then having to make sense of the house that God presumably lives in being destroyed on top of that. And you're supposed to go to the temple, and when the prophets say get right with God, that's kind of go to the temple and get right with God. If you can't go to the temple, how do you get right with God? How do you fix that relationship? And it leads a lot of people to, as you might imagine, just abandon their faith and say, you know what, you're right. Maybe the Babylonian gods are the right ones. They defeated us. Maybe they're the right ones to worship. And they switch gears. And so when Haggai is talking, he's talking to a remnant. And you heard that word in there. The few that are left, that are holding on to faith and saying, I don't think that God is done with us. I think that there's more to our story. But I don't know how, and I don't know where, and I don't know how that's going to happen. And so some hold on to their faith in exile, but it changes their faith. It broadens their expanse of faith. It makes them more resilient to the ups and downs in life and what faith can look like. And it kind of breaks that idea that the faith is tied to place and allows it to kind of this more expansive view of what being faithful might look like. Well, about 75 years past that, the Babylonians are not the superpower anymore. Now it's the Persians. And the Persians come in and they defeat the Babylonians. And now the eruption of change is happening again. And the Persians, wanting to curry favor, say, we will allow you to go back home. And this is a great, fantastic relief to those remnants who decide that they want to. Many of them decide not. They're like, well, 75 years, it's like multiple generations. I've got family, we've got land, we've got community here. We're good, we're going to stay. But some do go back. And the question now becomes, well, we've gone back, now what? And here comes Haggai to answer the question of now what. And it's a little humorous to some degree that the answer is a capital campaign, a stewardship meeting. That's what it is. Because what he gives is essentially a stewardship sermon and a capital campaign sermon of like, we're back, let's rebuild. But what's interesting about this stewardship campaign is that it's now tinted with a broader worldview and an understanding that things might happen. It's less this, if we build it, it'll last eternity. And more, we should build it because that's what we're called to do in this moment. But recognizing that God is apparently working in a global, wider view. The understanding of these nations' powers, which they say are dominated by their faiths and their gods, are now being seen as all kind of playing into God's wider plan. That this is a God of the world and the forces across the globe, not just in one nation in one place. And that these changes and these shifts might keep happening. It talks about the upheaval of things. And now what do we do with that upheaval? You know what? It reminds me, Did you ever play that game Perfection, where you had to push the board down and then you start a timer and then you got to put all those little pieces in before the timer runs out, and if you fail, like you'll and all the pieces fly up, and then you try again, you hope to do better, maybe you learned something the last time, you try to do it again and see what you can build up. It's kind of like that, this understanding that there might be future things kind of going everywhere. But what are we doing now in this moment, in this space that God is calling us to? It's this tension between a broader worldview and the question of, okay, but what do we do now? What do we do here in this point in time? And that shift is really pretty fantastic, pretty phenomenal. And it's also deeply relevant. I bop around to a lot of different little churches. I work with the presbytery, and and I get blessed by being able to come and spend time with you all as often as I can, and you're wonderful to worship with. And there's questions about what do we do in this moment, in this time. And you're doing your nominating committee right now, which involves a mission study, which is specifically that. That's why that's part of the process. It's asking, that things might change over time. So not what were you called to do 50 years ago, but what are you called to do now, in this moment, in this context? That's what Haggai's asking. Let's open our eyes and be wide-eyed about where we're at and what we're doing and answer that question. What are we called to do now, in this moment in time, in this space, in this place? Understanding that God is working broader than we can possibly imagine, and yet we're living that call out in this context, in this space, and we have a place to play in that. And that role might change, and yet we have a place and a thing to do. What is that? And that's Haggai's question. Like Haggai, like this story, I know that it's been hard to have change, and I know that it's been hard not having a permanent full-time pastor here, right? I do understand that that's hard. However, I will point out that just as an outside observer, I have noticed it develop in all of you an incredible resilience and ability to be flexible and deal with things. Some of you know, and so that I was supposed to be the pastor last week, for example, and something came up. We had to immediately, my partner, she's from Germany, and they really like forms checked and done exactly right. The bureaucracy, the stereotype of bureaucracy seems to be spot on from my perspective, and we had to go get a check mark, and we had to do it like right away, and so off we had to go, and I had to leave you in a lurch, and I felt really bad that I had to, and yet, this is a resilient congregation. Everyone was just like, we know how to do this. We can do this. We got this. It's fine. And you did do it. You did have it. You do have that in you. You've developed those muscles. You're a strong group called to provide this community that you're doing for each other. Now, beyond that, you're the one doing the mission study, so I'll let you find out what that looks like for you. But I see that in you, and I hope you do too. That you have gifts, and that the Haggai's question here is deeply relevant, as all of us in all of our different contexts ask that question: what are we called to do now? In this moment, in time, in this place. That's what God is asking. And I'm really excited to see what you answer.